schools. It's mainly focused on kind of narratives of destruction, despair, and what I'm hoping to do with this is kind of regain or re-give back that agency to the Jewish victims and those that did suffer, kind of moving it from that narrative to one that kind of shows that, well, Jewish people did fight back and they did, within the resources that they had, try to fight back. So I always see it as important to kind of remind students that Jewish victims were not passive victims, okay? They were kind of this group that unfortunately were targeted against a regime, but with what resources they had, they were able to fight back. However, you can't overemphasize the ability that Jewish people were able to fight back. It was extremely hard in order for them to do that, but hopefully today I can give you kind of some ideas or ways that I've tried to incorporate stories of resistance into the Holocaust curriculum in a way. So on the board, I know it's quite small, but there's just an example of this is an inquiry question that I've created based solely on Jewish resistance. And as you can see, you contextualize it at the start, but then you interweave these narratives of resistance. Now, I know with curriculum constraints that you might have your own inquiry question already, but there is the ability to interweave stories throughout, so you don't have to scrap the inquiry question that you have now. You can literally just interweave these narratives of resistance, just again to provide that agency back. So key things really is that primary sources, they are our key kind of use in just teaching the Holocaust in general, but particularly with the likes of resistance. So hopefully today I can share some of that with you. So to begin with, kind of the things you need to kind of discuss is the why. Why is it? What were the motivations of Jewish people kind of resisting? My starting point was looking at Abba Kovner. So Abba Kovner, he is kind of the founder of the kind of organized Jewish resistance movement. He made a proclamation to the Jewish youth and kind of encouraged the Jewish youth in particular to stand out. I had students analyse this. To give you a little bit more of a background, he started the United Partisans Organisation in 1942 when kind of things took the more systematic turn with the implementation of the gas chambers and things like that. So just having students read the proclamation, which I will put up now, I forgot it was there. The proclamation is just there. And having students utilise that source, not only do they get to see a handful of motivations, but as well it points out that, yes, Jewish people were weak and defenceless, but they are going to fight back if they can. But again, not overestimating this idea that every single Jewish person could fight back, because that wasn't the reality. But the reality was that Jewish people did. By examining the motivations first, rather than just jumping into kind of what resistance took place, students can kind of better contextualize the individual acts of resistance that they encounter later on. So it allows them to see resistance not just as isolated incidents, but they can kind of try and figure out, well, was it a personal reason that these people chose to resist, or was it a collective kind of reason? So first thing really is, when we do encounter the resistance, is more so looking at the non-violent forms. So I like to get like an initial understanding of what students know about resistance, because previously if you're teaching this in year 9, they would have looked at the likes of resistance within the transatlantic slave trade in year 8. So building on the likes of that. When I ask students, well, how do you think the Jewish community resisted? Most often, they go with the most violent forms that they can think of. So like the uprisings, you've got the sabotage, you've got the physical confrontations and escaping. And while the students aren't wrong, that's only just one small aspect, one small dimension of the resistance that took place. So I find it important to kind of introduce students to the non-violent forms of resistance first, maybe the ones that they didn't even realise could be a form of resistance, and then move on to the likes of your bigger uprisings. So I do this, again, utilising the primary sources. I do it through looking at photographs, and students will study these 6 photographs illustrating Jewish resistance, and they consider how has the Jewish community resisted, using these set of questions kind of as like a scaffolding way for them to think. So not only do they consider the methods of resistance, but they examine the risks that these individuals took as well. Another key thing to point out too is that, well, try and get the students to think about the nature of the source. The photograph in itself is an act of resistance. Lots of these were taken within the ghetto. You had theatres set up in the ghetto, schools set up in the ghetto. This reinforces that the photograph itself is also an act of resistance rather than what's happening on the inside of the image. Now, moving on to the more violent forms of resistance, I chose 3 case studies to focus on. So I looked at the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the Sobibor Uprising, and the Treblinka Uprising. Students are mostly aware with Auschwitz. That's the main concentration camp that they are aware of. What I wanted to do was kind of broaden students' understanding of the Holocaust, the geographical scale of the Holocaust as well, to show that, well, it was across like Europe. It wasn't just isolated in the likes of Auschwitz. So I believe it was important to kind of illustrate other concentration camps, or the ghettos or death camps, again, trying to break down the difference between a concentration camp, a ghetto, and a death camp too. So students just complete an information hunt and they fill out the table. They're based on information sheets. Again, they look at what was the event, when did it happen, where did it take place, and again, these dangers and obstacles. However, when I do hand them out, they are accompanied with maps. And these maps here, I know they're quite small on the screen, but they help students kind of understand the structural design of a concentration camp, which it's hard for like 14-year-olds to picture maybe what a concentration camp may look like, but these maps do help. It also helps aid the understanding too of when it comes to the dangers and obstacles. So again, it's small, but for example, Sobibor concentration camp was surrounded by swamp. Okay, so once they realised that, well, in the Sobibor uprising, they tried to escape. Well, it wasn't that easy. They had now another barrier to face. That next barrier was swamps that was located around it. Again, re-emphasising that it's not an easy process for Jewish people to fight back. Now, another key thing that I'm kind of interested in researching outside of the classroom is the role of women in the Holocaust. Women are often left out of narratives of the Holocaust. There is a gendered experience within the Holocaust. Both men and women experienced the Holocaust in very complete different ways. The historian Myrna Goldenberg, she kind of puts this perfectly, that women and men experience different horrors of the same hell. And again, it's not emphasizing that one gender experienced it worse than the other. That's not what we're trying to force. What we're trying to say is that, well, it wasn't just kind of a one experience for every single individual in there. It was very much different. So I also wanted to as well provide the voices to Jewish women, because lots of people think with the armed uprising it was just the men, it was just the male Jewish people that fought back, but that's not the case. And again, they do it in a variety of ways. Students are aware of Anne Frank, they know about Anne Frank's hiding, but I wanted to give that agency to other Jewish women who did fight back. One resource that I use to get this is the Jewish Women's Archive. So it contains a lot of both oral and written testimonies. That's mainly the resources that I based. And it's not just on the Holocaust, it's on Jewish history as a whole. It has thousands of kind of individual stories and narratives. And again, these are the 4 that I picked out. It reinforces, again, that is just not one type of resistance. You've got cultural resistance, and then you've got the kind of your more organised resistance with the likes of your Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Now, the last thing that I'm going to kind of speak about is oral testimony. Oral testimony is crucial. I think it's one of the main resources that we kind of should be using to teach the Holocaust, because survivor testimonies are invaluable. There's no better way to learn about the Holocaust, whether it be resistance or anything else, through the people who actually experienced it. We are very lucky that we have the digital archives on the likes of the Shoah Foundation. It's important, I think, to utilise them. Students can gain a lot from listening to the survivors of those that did resist or just experience the Holocaust. It takes a lot of courage for survivors to speak out, and unfortunately, a lot of survivors did take their stories with them to their grave due to multiple of reasons of not being comfortable to speak out the trauma and stuff. So I think it's important that we should utilise them. What I did in terms of resistance is I used the USC Shoah Foundation to access this. Again, it's a great resource to use. It does take time. to find the right one. But once you do, it's invaluable and you can literally utilize it in so many ways. What I wanted to do is I picked two Jewish survivors who participated in resistance. The two I found were Sonia Auerbach and Sydney Shacknow, and these two people resisted, but in very different ways. So Sonia was part of the partisan movement, and she did everything that she could to resist, and she was willing to resist until her death. Whereas Sydney Shacknow, he believed that only larger acts of resistance were important. So if any guards died, then that was successful, or if the camp was shut down, then that's successful. These two stances on resistance allowed me to draw on the historical concept of significance. Having students compare their testimonies allowed them to reconceptualize their understanding of the significance and understand that certain events, like resistance in the Holocaust, hold different weights for different people, even those that did experience in it. More so that over time, the survivors do reconsider their own narrative. So, for example, Sydney, when he was in a concentration camp, he thought resistance was the best way forward, but he went into a career of the military in the United States after the war, and that changed his mind on how he viewed resistance. So again, just pushing the kind of significance of it to show that it does change over time for survivors. So hopefully you have kind of being able to understand the importance of incorporating Jewish voices into Holocaust education, because I do think it is key. By incorporating these narratives and interweaving them into our lessons, we're not only honouring those who fought back, but we are kind of providing students with a more richer and nuanced understanding of the Holocaust. We're putting the perspective back onto the Jewish people rather than teaching it from the lens of the perpetrators or the lens of the allies or non-Jewish resistors, for example. So hopefully you've been able to take a few things, but thank you very much for listening.